Finally, after 16 years of speculation, the mystery surrounding actor Brad Renfro has been solved, and the results are not at all positive. The boy with the angelic smile on the big screen, Brad Renfro, had a life that was full of darkness, tragedy, and secrets that were only disclosed after having been kept hidden for a considerable amount of time. In-depth publications, interviews with coworkers, and conversations with others who were close to Brad have now shed light on the murky circumstances surrounding his passing, which have been a mystery for 16 years since the day he left this world forever. Not only that, but I have to be completely honest with you, it is not at all good. A tragic demonstration of the shadowy side of the entertainment world, where the glitz and glamour conceal the wounds that are not spoken about. I would want to begin by taking you back in time to the early 1980s, more precisely to the 25th of July in 1982, which is the day that Brad Renfro was born in the city of Knoxville, Tennessee. During that time period, Knoxville was a tiny city located in the southern region of the United States. Although it had beautiful streets, many working families were experiencing a great deal of economic difficulties. Brad came from a household that did not have a secure financial situation. It was his father who worked in the plant. To make money meet, his mother worked a variety of odd jobs. However, the tragedy began at an early age, when his parents split with only 5 years of marriage under their belts. On the other hand, Brad, who was just 5 years old at the time, was abruptly thrown into a life that was lacking in some way. The responsibility of his care was transferred to his grandmother, and the family relocated to a trailer park. Trailer parks are places of impoverished mobile homes, where the roofs are made of old automobiles, and daily life is a struggle against poverty and suffering. When I think about it, I picture a scene in which young Brad is running around and playing amid the rusting trailers, learning to be independent at a very young age. In Knoxville, he did not have access to the same opulent toys that city children had. On the contrary, he was a naughty chap, a student who frequently caused issues at school and even became well known within the local police force for being a problem boy. However, it was precisely these characteristics, toughness, and an inner spirit of defiance, that proved to be the key that allowed him to enter the world of Hollywood in the future. Let's discuss about the event that brought about a significant transformation in Brad's life. At that time, he had just become 10 years old, which was in the year 1993. When the film The Client was being prepared, the director Joel Schumacher, who was a prominent figure in Hollywood at the time and was sometimes referred to as John Wells Mayer in certain old records, was working on the project. A boy named Mark Sway, a toddler who witnessed a lawyer's suicide and accidentally learned a secret tied to the mafia, was the protagonist of this film, which was based on the best-selling novel written by John Grisham. The novel tells the story of a boy named Mark Sway. There are training programs in Los Angeles where children are trained like little stars, but Joel Schumacher did not want to choose a child actor from those institutions to be a professional child actor. From the depths of his soul, and from his own personal experience, he desired authenticity. He desired a youngster who truly understood the sensation of growing up too quickly and who felt the sorrow of a tough life. A specialized search was initiated by the casting crew, which was led by Merlin. It was not the typical practice of auditioning thousands of children. Instead, they reached out to schools that specialize in supporting youngsters who are experiencing difficulties, Jesuit priests, alternative schools, and even local police departments. Do you know any children who are difficult, children who are familiar with life on the street? They inquired in every city, moving from one to the next. After that, a retired police officer in Knoxville recalled the name of Brad Renfro. His statement was that Brad, the boy in question, is the kind of child who is out of control, yet there is something exceptional about him, a natural charisma. Despite the fact that Brad had never performed in front of an audience in his whole life, he was invited to try out for the role. However, Brad rapidly won over everyone despite the fact that he had no prior experience on stage and had no knowledge of scripts or cameras. Within a short period of time, he was able to memorize lines and act as if he were narrating regular stories. In a later interview, Joel Schumacher recalled, "I wanted a boy who understood the unforgiving nature of life from the very depths of his soul." The individual in question was Brad, who came from a low-income trailer park and had a tough childhood. He was that person. The Client was a film that was released in 1994 and went on to become a very successful blockbuster. It grossed more than $117 million all over the world and received positive reviews from critics. Due to the fact that Brad Renfro was awarded the Young Artist Award for Outstanding Young Actor, the media started praising him as the rising new star, the successor to River Phoenix, or Hollywood's golden boy. What you see here, however, is merely the glistening exterior. Behind all of that glitz and glitter, Hollywood has started to exploit Brad in a cruel and heartless manner, forcing him into roles that a child should not have to go through. To give you some time to reflect and feel, I will halt for a bit. All of a sudden, a young child from a low-income trailer park in Tennessee, who is only 10 years old, becomes a celebrated figure, with money flowing in like water and renown spreading everywhere. However, who was his guide? Who was it that shielded him from the temptations that people in adulthood face? His family was in a state of extreme disarray. Despite the fact that she loved him very much, his grandma was unable to physically accompany her grandson on film sets because of her advanced age. The fact that his mother was battling with drug issues, as stated by various sources from colleagues later on, made it impossible for her to be a reliable support system. The Hollywood studios themselves disowned his father, who was considered a negative influence due to his working-class upbringing and possibly gruff nature. This led to his father's exclusion from the industry. Brad started living by himself on film sets, going to parties with adults, and engaging in conversations that were inappropriate for minors. He also started smoking cigarettes. In later interviews, Brad recalled with regret that he began smoking when he was 9 years old, and that he had his first experience with alcohol when he was only 11 years old. To tell you the truth, hearing those words causes my heart to hurt. An excessively young youngster was forced into the adult world, rather than being allowed to play with their pals. The films that Brad went on to make after that propelled him farther into the fatal maelstrom. How about we discuss about the year 1995, when Brad appeared in the movie The Cure, which was directed by Peter Horton. A weighty theme that is full of emotion and sadness is about the friendship between two boys, one of whom has AIDS. The film chronicles the story of their connection. After some time had passed, Peter Horton recalled in an interview that Brad possessed a remarkable sexual charm, a magnetism that made everyone captivated. Fans even sent him birthday cards with messages such as, "I dream of waking up next to you." They wrote on the cards themselves. Just 12 years old at the time, Brad was a little boy. The idea that a child could be used as a sexual symbol and then sold is a horrible one to consider. The following year, in 1995, Brad also appeared in the Disney film adaptation of the famous novel Tom and Huck, which was based on Mark Twain's work. The character of Huck Finn, a rambunctious little kid who embodied Brad's rugged image, was performed by Brad. But there were parts of the movie that filled me with dread. During one of the scenes, Brad and his co-star Jonathan Taylor Thomas were required to roll around in the icy mud environment. It was drenching, and Brad was wearing virtually nothing but his boxers. It was necessary for them to act in true misery in order to achieve authenticity, the director said, despite the fact that they were chilly to the point of shaking. It was even said by the production designer of the movie that Brad was sexually active at that time and had women that were considerably older than him, despite the fact that he was only 13 years old, even Disney. Despite the fact that the studio was a family-friendly and child-friendly establishment, they did not protect him adequately and instead took advantage of Brad's early maturity in order to sell tickets. Moving further with the adventure, the year 1996 saw the release of the picture Sleepers, which was directed by Barry Levinson and included notable actors such as Robert De Niro, Kevin Bacon, and Dustin Hoffman. When Brad was just 13 years old, he performed the role of a young kid who was incarcerated in a juvenile detention center and suffered from severe physical, mental, and sexual torture. The violent moments in the film, which was based on a true narrative of abuse that occurred in New York prisons during the 1960s, were so intense that even professional actors became exhausted. It was necessary for Brad to confront such scenes on a daily basis, acting as if he were experiencing the same kinds of suffering himself. It is my imagination that after the filming, young Brad would go back to the hotel room by himself and make an effort to forget the horrible pictures that were carved deep inside his consciousness. Not only did these responsibilities have a significant impact on a child's mental health, but they also left permanent scars on a youngster during the formative years of their personality. After that, in 1998, when Brad was only 14 years old, he was a part of the film Apt Pupil, which was based on a short tale written by Stephen King and directed by Bryan Singer, who would later get engaged in sexual abuse allegations. His character, Todd Bowden, was a little lad who was obsessed with an elderly Nazi who was concealed. The movie was littered with gloomy sequences. Inside a dark cellar, he takes the life of a destitute individual. In addition, there is a moment that was filmed in close-up from head to toe, and there are even hints of sexual activity with a female character. Bradley was not only subjected to sexual exploitation as a result of these positions, but he was also sexualized in public. During that time period, Hollywood was quite proficient at classifying young actors. They utilized Brad's true history from the poor trailer park, where he had a problematic childhood, in order to generate realism for the films. Brad was firmly ensconced in the problem boy box. On the other hand, who was accountable for his protection? Daisy Harrison, director of Brad's business. After his death, he gave an interview in which he stated that he had been emotionally abandoned from a young age and that he had always yelled for someone to establish limits for him. No one, however, did that. Over the course of his life, Brad lived by himself on film sets, went to parties with adults, consumed alcohol, and experimented with potentially harmful substances. After this point, Brad's life started to go in the wrong direction. In the year 1998, when he was only 15 years old, he was taken into custody for the first time for the theft of a yacht and possession of cocaine. In the enormous coverage that he received at the time, the press referred to him as the fallen child star. Nevertheless, Hollywood did not stop. They continued to cast him in roles, taking advantage of the problems associated with his image. Bully, a film directed by Larry Clark and released in 2001, featured Brad in the role of a violent adolescent who was involved in a murder. As a reflection of Brad's life at the time, the movie was packed with scenes of sexual activity, violent acts, and drug use. In the film Deuces Wild, which was released in 2002, he played the role of a street mobster. As time went on, he became progressively addicted. Heroin became a companion from day to day. In 2005, Brad was taken into custody for driving under the influence of impairment. In 2007, he committed a violation of his probation, which resulted in a brief period of incarceration. The occurrences in question were not random. Because there was no monitoring from family members, they were the result of this. The industry. Do you remember Judy Garland, who played the role of a kid in the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz? That girl was coerced by MGM Studio into using amphetamines in order to maintain her weight, which ultimately led to her developing an addiction to the drug and her away at the age of 47 from an overdose. In the wake of being rejected by Hollywood, Dana Plato, a character from the sitcom Different Strokes, turned to substance abuse and ultimately took her own life at the age of 34. A River in Phoenix. Outside of the Viper Room Club in 1993, the young star who appeared in Stand By Me passed away from an overdose at the age of 23. After that, Brad Renfro is the next link in that chain of fatal events. In my opinion, Hollywood is not a location that is capable of generating dreams. Rather, it is a machine that devours the souls of children. They employ children for the purpose of authenticity because they bring in enormous money, but they utterly disregard the responsibility to safeguard them. According to an article that was published by BuzzFeed News in 2018, journalist Adam Thayer stated that the entertainment industry is the only field in the United States that provides children with major positions, allowing them to influence hundreds of people around them, but also places them in a scenario that is crushing without providing them with the required assistance. The most excruciating part of the pain came when Brad Renfro passed away on January 15, 2008. The cause of his death was determined to be an overdose of heroin coupled with morphine, and he was discovered laying motionless at an apartment in Los Angeles. 25 years old, a young talent that will never be recovered. At the Oscar ceremony that year, Brad's name was not even mentioned in the memorial part for the deceased, as if he were simply another cliché of a child star who had fallen out of favor and was not worthy of being remembered. But now, 16 years later, thanks to the in-depth study written by Adam Thayer and the interviews he conducted with his colleagues, we fully comprehend the enigma that lies behind it. It was not a spontaneous occurrence, but rather Hollywood's institutionalized indifference. Pedro, a producer who had previously collaborated with Brad, stated that we were unsuccessful with children like Brad. There was a possibility that someone should have intervened earlier and stated that he was not psychologically prepared for working on a film set that was full of danger and volatility. As an elderly person who has followed Hollywood over many decades, I am experiencing feelings of both sorrow and rage. This is my personal perspective. Any one of us could be Brad Renfro's son or grandchild. He is a possibility. In addition to his natural aptitude, he possessed a charming grin and acting ability that affected listeners. When I was younger, I used to sit in front of the television and watch The Client. I used to assume that the boy would one day become a famous actor like Tom Cruise or Leonardo DiCaprio. On the contrary, he was consumed by the system and exploited to the point of exhaustion. This prompts me to give serious consideration to the obligation that we, as older audiences, have. Movies are our world. We have spent our entire lives taking pleasure in them, but we also have the ability to bring about change. In the wake of the Howlett Me Too movement in 2017, Hollywood initiated a number of good improvements, such as the implementation of regulations mandating the presence of independent supervisors for children working on film sets and the expansion of the Coogan Fund to safeguard the earnings of child actors. As retirees, we have the ability to share experiences with our grandchildren, such as Brad's, in order to caution them about the negative aspects of celebrity and to encourage them to watch films produced by companies that are committed to ethical standards. Not only is the story of Brad Renfro a personal tragedy, but it is also a reminder for the entire society. It motivates us to recognize the value of life and to shield children from any and all temptations. You should be there for your grandchildren if they have aspirations of becoming performers. You should also tell them that fame is not everything and that you should set clear boundaries for them. Brad Renfro's Hollywood needs to make changes so that there are no more second or third places, and fresh talent should be allowed to flourish without being stifled. What I remember most about the decade of the 1990s is that Hollywood was a vibrant place, with blockbusters such as Titanic and Forrest Gump taking the spotlight. On the other hand, there were a great number of tragic tales similar to Brad's. As an illustration, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, who played kid roles in the television show The Lost Boys, were themselves victims of abuse and addiction. Feldman did not conceal the fact that the film industry was rife with predators until much later in his story. It is highly likely that Brad was also a victim of the system, even if he did not openly do so. I believe that Brad would have been different if there had been more stringent restrictions in place earlier, such as the laws that are in place today that require parents or guardians to be present on film sets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Additional discussion on Brad's legacy is in order. Even though he only lived a brief life, he left behind films that will be remembered forever. As a result of Brad's performance in The Client, which also featured Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones, the picture is still taken into consideration as one of the best legal films of the 1990s. Even if he was controversial, Apt Pupil demonstrated his brilliance in roles that were difficult. Some of his co-workers, such as Ian McKellen from Apt Pupil, voiced their grief after his passing, stating that Brad was a gift that was not fully utilized. A BuzzFeed piece published in 2018 brought the story back to life, resulted in conversations on the protection of youngsters in the entertainment industry. To be sure, many thanks to Brad. A great number of youngsters are safer today. Because his narrative moves me so deeply, I could talk about Brad for an indefinite amount of time. As persons of advanced age, we have experienced an excessive number of losses. Nevertheless, we have also acquired the ability to discover optimism in the midst of sorrow. The lessons that Brad teaches us are that there are real people with real suffering behind the theatrical lights. Strive to live a meaningful life while safeguarding the next generation. I am appreciative of your hearing. If you think it's excellent and helpful, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel so that you may get more tales like this. I hope you have a wonderful day and excellent health, and I will see you again in the future video, where I will share some further secrets from the golden age of Hollywood. I will miss you.